Evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the 2013 blog. Now, what I thought we'd talk about tonight was last night's viewing of Amour, again at the Tyneside Cinema. Now, why I thought I'd do this was for the simple reason that towards the end of last year, after I'd seen my last film of the year, which unfortunately it was The Hobbit, I created a list of 10 films of 2012, which I thought were the best 10 films of the year. Now, top 3 was incredibly easy. There were 3 films last year that were just head and shoulders above everything else out there. But after I'd finished my list, I realised there were quite a few films that I'd forgotten I'd even seen. And the problem is a lot of them, in hindsight, even though I'd forgotten about them, were actually better than the ones that I'd put on the list. So, what I thought I'd do instead, this year, was to create a vlog of all the films that I see throughout 2013, which will then mean that I can, at the end of the year, look back. I'll be able to see everything that I've seen, see what my thoughts were on everything, and yeah, so let's do this. So, Amour, which is the new film from Michael Haneke. It won the 2012 Palme D'or at Cannes. Now, the Palme d'Or is a slightly problematic award in that it's the film world's version of the Booker Prize, in which the problem with the Booker Prize is the same problem you have with the Palme d'Or, in that you don't always guarantee the winner, even though it is the most prestigious art house prize out there. It's not always really the best film of the year. I mean, you look at sort of 2011, the winner was The Tree of Life, which anyone who watched that, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan anyway of Terrence Malick, but I found that really, really hard going, The Tree of Life. I don't really see why it got the Palme d'Or when there were so many other great films out there in 2011. You had the likes of Tyrannosaur, you had the likes of Snowtown, and yet, for some reason, the Palme d'Or went to Tree of Life. Anyway, long story short, last year, 2012, Palme d'Or was won by Amour. New film by Michael Haneke, his second one in, I think it's 3 years, since he won, I think, in 2009 as well, or 2010, with The White Ribbon, that was a good film. So, I had very high hopes, A, because it's Michael Haneke, and B, because this is the strange thing. You watched the other day the Oscar previews when they sort of gave out all the nominations. Now, as expected, Amour is in the category for Best Foreign Language Oscar. But Amour is also in the running, not only for Best Actress, for... getting in now. Anyway, it's in the running for Best Actress, as well as, bizarrely, in the running for Best Picture. Now, I've not got anything massively against the Academy, but it's very, very rare to see a film entirely in a foreign language nominated for Best Picture Oscar. I mean, I was thinking today at lunchtime, trying to think when was the last time I'd seen that happening. And, I mean, you had Clint Eastwood's one about Iwo Jima a few years ago, which was sort of half in English, half in Japanese. But for a film entirely in a foreign language getting nominated for Best Picture, I think the last one that I can remember doing that was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because that was entirely in Mandarin. And so it's no small feat that Amour has managed to get a nomination for Best Picture. I mean, it's never going to win. There's no way the Academy were going to let a film not in the English language win the Best Picture Oscar. I mean, they just will not let that happen. As I said in my last blog, I think that Best Picture will go to Les Mis. But, anyway, Amour was out sort of tail end 2012, and unfortunately, I missed it. Now, it just so happened I was looking through the other day for the listings for the Tyneside Cinema, and they just happened to be having a re-showing, thank goodness, of Amour this Sunday. Now, as someone that really enjoys foreign language film, what you sort of get used to is going into a screening room on your own, and you can almost guarantee the other people who'll be in there. You know there'll be a few sort of earnest-looking art house students. You'll find somebody on their own, probably, as I'm doing here, writing a blog. You'll probably find a strange old couple in burlap and hemp and tie-dye. Now, that's what I'm sort of used to having whenever you go in there. And, you know, I don't mind as long as I get my chosen seat right on the wall and no one sits by me. I don't really mind who's in there. But we got in on Sunday afternoon. Now, this is a showing at 3:30 on a Sunday afternoon of a film entirely in French. It was full. Literally, there was not a seat to be had. I managed to get one of the last few seats in there. People after me were having to break up their parties to sit one person in one random seat somewhere else. This doesn't happen. So, either it's people hearing the Oscar buzz and thinking, well, maybe let's catch this, or, alternatively, it's people who genuinely, there's a watershed moment and people are really wanting to see intelligent foreign cinema, and let's hope it's the latter. Anyway, on to the film itself. So, it's, the film starts with the police breaking into an apartment in Paris. And what they find when they break in, you can sort of, there's no words, but you can see from their reactions what's going to be in there. Because obviously there's a stench of something, and I think it's pretty obvious straight away it's going to be the stench of a corpse. And they find this bedroom with 2 doors to it, both of which have been sealed, locked, and coated up with parcel tape. Now, they manage to break open the doors, and they walk into the bedroom, and they find the body of this elderly woman laid out basically in state, coated in flowers, and in the early stages of decomposition. Now, after this scene, it cuts out, and the next thing you see is a shot, it's beautifully done, of the crowd at a symphony. Now, anyone that's ever been to the symphony and sat round the edges in one of the boxes, or alternatively has ever been to watch a play, an opera, and like that at the cinema, they'll know what it is when you're sitting in positions, because they're the places you can sit where you can watch people's faces without them seeing you. And that's a really unique position, in that anyone that sits there and has done that, you can just watch this entire gamut of human emotions on everyone's face, and no one has any idea that you're watching them. And that's what we get here. We get this picture of the stalls taken from the stage, and the camera just basically holds it steady. And what we do as an audience is we try and spot where in this picture is the woman whose face we saw in that first scene after she died. It's a really clever way of starting a film, because okay, you eventually find where she is and you watch them, but the implication is this could be the story of anyone at all, and it's a really clever way of doing it. So we've got now this elderly couple, man and his wife, Anne and Georges, and they're there to see a performance by their former student, which they watch, they enjoy very much indeed. Afterwards they see him and they go home. And we're introduced into their apartment, which is very nice. It's full of books, full of music. It's clearly the apartment of 2 very cultured people. Now, the next morning, you see them both having breakfast together and having the sort of conversation that these people do. Now, first point for that is, the conversations, they're so well realised. It borders on the mundane, but it's so beautiful to just watch a naturalistic conversation because it doesn't feel anyway forced. It doesn't feel like you're watching a film. It feels like you're genuinely in these people's lives. Now, they have breakfast, and Georges goes across to get some salt from the cupboard. And he turns back, and he finds Anne, his wife, just sort of sat there in this cathartic state, and he can't seem to get any kind of response out of her. He tries, touching her, shouting at her. He tries in the end, he turns the tap on and gets a dishcloth and wets it and runs it across the back of her neck to try and get some kind of response out of her. But nothing's working. So, as you do, Georges, off he goes to try and get his phone, to try and, get dressed and then call a doctor. Now, he's left the water running, and this is a huge theme through the entire film, is running water. You see it so often in so many scenes. The water is just left running, whether it be through rain, whether it be through a tap, and there's a constant theme of running water wherever you go through the film, which becomes very important later on. But he's left the tap going. Now, while getting changed in the bedroom, suddenly he hears the tap turned off. So he comes back into the kitchen and finds his wife is no longer cathartic. She's talking to him again, but she has no memory at all of what's just happened. So it then cuts to a few weeks later on, when we find out that she's been hospitalised and they found that she's had a stroke. And she's now coming back from hospital, but she's confined to a wheelchair. And there are some beautifully touching scenes between the two of them as he tries to help her out of the wheelchair and into her usual chair in the living room, because it's so ungainly, the two of them. And it's not stylised in any way. They just literally, she clings on to him because her body is starting to fail her. Now, they put her in the chair and they have a chat in which she makes him promise whatever happens, he will never again force her to go back into that hospital. And he assures her he won't. He will, as long as he can, he will continue to look after her at home and make sure she can convalesce there. And sort of what happens through the course of the film is that progressively you see this illness of Anne. It gets progressively worse and worse and worse, and she has more strokes. Her body just genuinely starts to fall apart, and it's done in incremental stages. And sort of, the path this disease is going to go through. At one point, he comes back from a funeral and finds that she's collapsed on the floor because she was trying to do something without him, and obviously she couldn't do it. Now, he helps her back into her chair and everything else. But as the film goes on, she becomes less and less responsive, and she can do less and less and less. Now, you know the pattern of where the film is going to go, but what surprises you is the things that you feel will be the most distressing, and the things that you feel you as an audience really shouldn't watch. For example, there's one scene in which they get a nurse in who helps her to bathe. There's another nurse who, after her bowels fail her, shows Georges how to apply this diaper to her to help with that. And these are the scenes that you feel should be the most distressing, because this is basically poor Anne. Her body is totally failing her. And yet they're not. The most distressing scenes, certainly for me, came later on, when it's Anne's power of speech that fails her. And she's there in her bed, being talked to by her daughter. And she's obviously trying to say something, but she can't. And it's not so much Anne, it's the daughter, and you can see the frustration on the face of her daughter, who's trying desperately to understand what is it her mother wants. She's trying to be patient, trying to understand what it is. and she can't. The world has gone beyond it. Now, following this, the daughter feels the appropriate thing to do is to put her mother into a home to try and, because she feels that it's too much pressure on George. Now, if you recall back at the start, George promised that she would never again go into hospital, anything like that. He refuses to let her go. He says, no, the best person and the only person to understand who she is and what she needs is me. There's nobody else who can do this. So there ends up with sort of a standoff in the end between George and the nurse, because he feels the nurses are infantilising Anne, which to an extent they are. You do see them being very, very patronising, and whether it's the nature of their job, who knows, but George understands that you cannot let Anne get that way. He has to keep stimulating her. He has to keep making her eat, making her drink, making her try and talk, because otherwise she will just fade away. And it's these scenes that are totally, totally heartbreaking, because George is trying desperately to keep the woman he loves with him, but she's turning more and more and more into this empty shell, that there's just nothing left of her. Now, I was saying earlier on about metaphor of the running water, which is happening throughout the film. There's always, people are constantly turning on taps, but nobody ever turns one off. The only time I noticed anyone turning off a tap or rain stopping was after Anne has died, finally. And George comes back from the shops with some flowers, which obviously at the start of the film we saw that Anne was laid out covered in flowers. And he runs water into the sink and he turns it off. And this is the only time in the entire film we see water having been turned off. And it's just symbolic of the fact that that's it. Anne's now gone. This is the last we're going to see of her. And ultimately, that water, which contains the flowers, is going to end up covering Anne. And ultimately, her life is complete. And it's a beautiful moment to try and understand that. I mean, you get an awful lot in films at times, films that are overly symbolic, and some of them can work so well. You look at things like Lars von Trier's Antichrist, which every single scene in that is dripping with some kind of symbolism. You're thinking, okay, there's an apple there, what does it mean? Is that meaning something else? In the same way, anyone who saw last year's Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, which was my second best film of 2012, that had the same thing. Every single scene, you were thinking, well, is that symbolic or something? That's not the same here. There's basically, in this film, there are two pieces of symbolism. There's running water, and there is a pigeon that keeps coming into the flat through the open window. And every time Georges chases it out, until after Anne has died, when this pigeon comes back, and he tries to capture it. And after a shuffling scene with him and a blanket, he finally manages to corner and capture this pigeon. And you sort of wonder, what's he going to do with it? But you don't see. And then ultimately at the end, he's writing a letter, and he explains that he couldn't do anything to the pigeon, he'd let it go. And that whole chase is symbolic of the entire film. It's just Georges constantly chasing round, trying to catch this illness. And when he finally catches it, Anne's gone. And all he can do is finally let her go, in the same way as he let the pigeon go. And so ultimately he, as you've seen at the start, he locks up the flat and he just leaves. And it's a beautifully touching scene to just watch these final scenes when Georges finally accepts that his wife, who he loved, she's gone. And he just leaves their home and walks out. Now, what I would say about this film is that we're only, 2 weeks into the year, I would say if in December this film is not in my top 10 of 2013, we will have had an incredible year of film, because this film is just out of this world. I would think, and I would hope, it's going to certainly scoop the best foreign language film Oscar. Obviously, it's not going to trouble the best film. There's no way it's going to do that. Emmanuelle Riva, got him in the end, who plays Anne. She's up for Best Actress. Now, that's going to be, this year, a really, really interesting category, because Emmanuelle Riva is the oldest actress ever to get nominated, and she's up against Quavajene Wallace for Beasts of the Southern Wild, who's the youngest ever nominee. Now, the annoying thing for me is that I haven't seen Beasts of the Southern Wild, and I've been told it's really, really good, and I'm gutted I missed it. So I can't really judge against those other performances just how good is Emmanuelle Riva. But I would say they would have to really go some to outact the performance she gives here, because she is outstanding. I mean, this is the real problem we have with film these days, is that all too often the gongs, the plaudits, things everyone goes to watch, all just tend to go to these well-known actors who give okay performances. Those of us who go and watch these art house films, we get so much more, but there's never any recognition. What you'll get is films winning things like the Palme d'Or, which this did, and I have to say, rightly so. It's amazing. But it just it upsets me that we spend so much time in these films, and case in point, I put my list of the 10 best films of 2012 onto Twitter, and for the best film, which I gave in the end to a Chilean film called Nostalgia for the Light, I used on that afterwards the hashtag film of 2012. And I sort of thought afterwards, let's just see where everybody else's film of the year was. Clicked on that. Literally, there were people saying there was The Dark Knight Rises, which I didn't see, but I have been told is very, very good. There were others who were saying The Hobbit, best film of the year? I don't think so. This is what we've come to, is that you get these blockbuster films that are just chock full of effects and noise and stars, and people go and watch them in their thousands, in their millions. And yet, you get a film like this, Amour, which really is a beautiful portrait of what love is and what love means. It's what I think we all, in the end, aspire to get. And yet, it's seen by so few. I mean, I was delighted to see the screen room full. I am delighted to see it in all the categories for the Oscars that it's getting. I hope it does well. Obviously, it's not going to get Best Film. I'm hoping Emmanuelle Riva does get Best Actress, because she is out of this world. But ultimately, I'm hoping this is a watershed moment for the Oscars, and that in future we're going to see more foreign films in these categories. Because ultimately, these are films that we deserve to watch. They're films that deserve to have a much wider audience than they get. And if you do get a chance, just go and watch this film. Be moved. Enjoy it. It's not an easy watch by any means, but it's so worth it. The performances are incredible. And like I say, at the end of the year, I'm almost guaranteeing you it will be in my top 10, top 5, if not top 3. It was just that good. What a film. Good night.